presented by Prize Picks on the Mayo Media Network. I am Garion Thorne, and you're going to be seeing a lot of me on this particular channel as the season progresses. We are going to be doing day-by-day slate breakdowns for DFS Fantasy Baseball. And when I say day by day, I mean every day. This isn't like hockey. This isn't like basketball. We are doing Monday through Sunday. We're doing the weekends too. So, there's going to be me, a couple other contributors. It's going to be a really, really, really good time. And you guys know how to help out the channel. You got to do a bunch of different things. And it starts simply enough by just liking this video. Also, please, if you could, go to the audio feed of this podcast, leave a like, leave a 5-star review on Apple, and you get put into a draw. This is the Mayo special for $100. It is that easy. We are not above bribery here at the Mayo Media Network. So leave your Twitter handle or an email in that 5-star review, and you are automatically put into that draw. I also mentioned Prize Picks, who is sponsoring this show. What you can do right now is go over, sign up at prizepicks.com, put in the code MMNMLB, and you are going to be able to get a match bonus of up to $100 on your first deposit when you use that code. One more time, MMNMLB. So with all that in mind, and after you've left a like on the video and left a comment down below saying who you think is the best bounce back player for the 2021 MLB season, the reason you have to do that, the reason why that's kind of fitting, is we are talking about bounce back players for the 2021 MLB season. And there is no one I would rather do it with than Jim Sonis of numberfire.com. It's been so long since I got to talk baseball with Jim. I'm really excited. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time, man.
I mean, thank you, Gary, and for this gift. I didn't realize you were going to be doing daily MLB stuff. Like, this is an exciting day for me personally, knowing that I get some more good content to consume, because I was thinking, like, in my podcast, like, listening schedule last week, like, I hit a dead zone, man. Like, there's a lot of good stuff to listen to, but during the non-NFL season, I have more like free agency period in my brain for like additional podcasts. So I know now that like, at least I won't be starved for good content. So thank you to you and Pat for filling that gap for me. I appreciate that.
Well, I will say, for the 6 people in my DMs, in my Twitter replies for the last 4 years who have been like, Gary, and when are you going to do the rotation again? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't control these things. I know the reunion show has been like the pandemic special. People coming back together on Zoom calls. This is about as close to a rotation reunion as I think we're going to get. Everyone who watched that show knows Jim was basically on every other episode. That's how much I like talking to Jim about fantasy baseball. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one show, bounce back sleeper. I mean, we all know how the term sleeper is kind of weird. I think it's literally like these players fell asleep last season. So I guess the term is kind of apt when we talk about this in particular. But we're going to do a positional players show. We're going to do a pitchers show. And I think this is a really important topic, because when we're talking about the 2021 season, the looming specter of the 2020 season and how we use that sample size, I mean, do you look at it and say, I have a hard and fast rule for every single player? Do you have to parse case by case? And we're kind of going to do that today. But generally, Jim, before we get into specifics for some of these positional players, is there a way you're looking at that 2020 season?
Yeah, I think that for me, if I can explain away struggles, I will want to buy into people, and I won't want to buy into bounce backs, because like you said, it is a small sample. So when you're looking at like results-based stats, like batting average, even like OPS and stuff like that, you're going to see a lot of flukiness, and that's going to be pretty volatile. But the more quickly stabilizing stuff, like that's more than enough sample to get a good read on strikeout rate, good read on batted ball numbers. So if I can explain away the issues a player had, I think like even if we want to go to like Christian Yelich, like I can explain away his strikeout rate by saying, okay, he just wasn't swinging. It was very weird. So like I can explain that away pretty easily. And that's going to be a guy that I'm going to want to buy back in on, because I can expect that to reasonably get better this year. But there are some guys where it's like, I want to buy in because, I want to take advantage of small samples and try to, buy the dip and stuff like that. But it's really hard with some of these guys to get over the numbers they put up, even the advanced numbers they put up last year. And I think that like my broad philosophy is I want to buy back in, but that is so far from universal, which is it kind of winds up being what you had alluded to. It really is a case by case basis, because for a lot of these guys, buying the dip is a pretty tough sell for me.
Yeah, it's very, very case by case for me as well. And I think for a lot of the guys with larger samples, I mean, Yelich is kind of the best example we have because he's a, consensus top 10 pick, but someone who did see, his ADP fall by like 300% from season to season. But there's so much of a sample of just Yelich goodness that I think we can kind of buy back in. But some of the guys we're going to talk about on today's show, it's not just the 2020 thing. There's some other stuff that might be working against them. And I think one of the best examples of that is Nolan Arenado. And Arenado, someone who was a consensus first round fantasy baseball draft pick for about 5 years when he was in the real glut of his career out there in Colorado. Now it's not just, hey, he's coming off a bad season. It's, hey, he's moving from Colorado to St. Louis. Not just worse for ballpark factor reasons, but a team that's been pretty underwhelming offensively for the last 2 seasons, regardless of what they do. So let's just go over some numbers here. ADP of 37.1 right now on NFBC draft boards. His 2020 statistics, 201 plate appearance sample size / 253, 303, 434 with a 76 WRC plus. WRC plus always hates Rockies. I will put that point out there, but still, that is a rough number for Nolan Arenado. 241 BABIP. So that's something you can look at and say, well, especially in Colorado, maybe that's due for a little positive regression, but 30th percentile expected batting average, 12th percentile expected WOBA. And then you toss in the whole, he was just bad on the road, and he's always been at least bad to average on the road. Is a 3rd round price tag enough of a drop for Arenado, or were you almost expecting more coming into this season?
I would need a lot more personally to get there, because I think it's not just the fact that he's leaving, but it's also the profile of the player. You look at Nolan Arenado, and the big thing he's providing or has provided in the past is power. He's not a stolen base guy. I agree with your thoughts on the lineup in general. Probably not going to be one that leads to a lot of runs scored, runs driven in relative to what you'd expect out of a guy at his spot in the order in a different lineup. And I don't know what the power number will look like. You were talking about some of the baseball savant numbers, like his barrel rate last year was 5.4%. So that makes it tough for me to expect him to be a big power guy. Because even like in years past, when he was really good in Colorado, barrel rate 8% in 2019, 7.2% in 2018, 8.5% in 2017. So those are just kind of, they're above average, but not like well above average numbers. So you're taking those numbers and putting them in St. Louis. He is going to be a high average guy. I think that's, if you're looking for a bounce back for Arenado, you can expect the batting average to be back above 290 or so. Like, that's realistic to me. He's going to get his hits. He'll be very good there. But if I'm going to get a guy who's only going to excel in that one area in the 3rd round and not give me anything in stolen bases, that's really tough for me to do. So I think that I would need the price to come down quite a bit, honestly, before I buy into Arenado, just because like he's losing the one thing he did really well, and that was power. He's not going to have that. I mean, the batting average will still be fine, but I find it really hard to see a good ceiling out of Arenado. Even if the floor is fine, I just don't know if the ceiling is there. So I would need a pretty big discount relative to where he's currently going. I guess like I'd be curious to hear the counter argument. Like, what's the argument for taking Arenado in the third round?
Yeah, it's interesting because even, as I alluded to off the top, literally the title of the show is Picks and Bets. So we can talk a little sportsbook here too. But there are places that have Arenado as like the 3rd or 4th NL MVP favorite. And I guess, MVP is such a narrative award. I can kind of see what's happening here. Like, big new name on new team. He's always going to be a plus defender, like 99th percentile, outs above average. So, you get the whole package when we're talking about real life MVP races. But yeah, there seems to be this inflation on Arenado across just baseball as a whole that I don't really understand. And it's at a position that's incredibly deep. And, we're going to talk about a couple guys available at this position in just this show. But, even someone like, Matt Chapman, who also had a really bad 2020, like, there's buying windows for a lot of third basemen. And I feel like I wouldn't be paying up top here.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Chapman's the perfect example because they're basically like the same dude.
Yeah.
Like, I think that like that's kind of what you're getting, except Chapman's not going to a worse park. I think that some of the health stuff with him explains away his struggles. And I'm not sure if we're going to get, like, we've seen him be a very powerful hitter in his current park. That's where he's still at. So I think that Chapman's actually a really good name to bring up. I'd rather bank on that power being present in 2021 than what we have with Arenado for sure.
So let's go to a guy who does have a good home ballpark. I don't know what it's called anymore. To me, it'll be Miller Park. But Keston Hiura, man, there are some guys we're going to talk about where at the end of the day, even in our laziest analysis, we can just say, look, this guy was good in 2017, 2018, 2019, weird year, weird mental year. Like that's something we kind of have to put more of an impact on than we usually would. I mean, we're numbers guys, but it's just a strange season. A lot going on in 2020. So there's guys who you can just say, look, we have 3,000 plate appearances of sample. I'm going to lean with that. Hiura is not one of those guys. He does have pedigree. He's got prospect pedigree. And I think that always, when you're literally in a draft room and the seconds are ticking down and you're like upside, 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 I get it with Keston, but we've now had 2 seasons of limited sample that have been almost polar opposites of each other. So last year, 246 plate appearances, a slash line of 212, 297, 410, struck out almost 35% of his plate appearances. And that's worrisome because that was also apparent in his good season in 2019, where 348 plate appearances, 140 WRC plus, but BABIP over 400, home run to fly ball ratio above 24%. So there were already the red flags in the good sample. You could say last year was like worst case scenario, but what's best case scenario?
Yeah, I mean, best case scenario, he goes back to doing what he did in the minors, where he was this really high contact guy and was like this tremendous hitter. Yeah, I mean, I remember the draft profiles coming out where they were like, Hiura might not be, I think he was hurt coming out of college. And like, there were questions about whether he'd be able to even play defense. And they were like, doesn't matter, he'll hit. And that was kind of my assumption going in. And he showed that in the low minors where he was a low strikeout guy who had some power, just a really good hitter, like this super talented guy. But like you said, that strikeout rate was present in 2019, and strikeout rate is a number that stabilizes in like 60 plate appearances. So there was more than enough sample in 2019, more than enough sample in 2020 to get a read on what he's going to be. So I think that what you said about 2019 is actually the most pertinent part here, is because if we're expecting a bounce back 2019, you're banking on him being an outlier again. And I don't really want to bank on guys being outliers, especially when they're going in the top 70 as far as NFBC ADP goes. That's pretty tough for me to get there. But I do think that there is, like, if you were to say you must take Arenado at his ADP or Hiura at his, I would take Hiura for sure, because there is a path to him being better. I think that path is actually another thing you brought up, the mental side, because in 2020, he's playing second base. He's really, really, really bad. And that can weigh on a guy, especially if you're so young. And now Colton Wong is there. Hiura can move to first base, which does mean he's learning a new spot. And that could be a potential downside to this. But if you're not playing hideous defense over at second base, you can focus more on your hitting. I think that that's a potential upside for Hiura, because we know he has that pedigree. We know in the past he has been a guy who can be very talented. So I think with Arenado, where I needed him to fall really far from where he was going, I'd be okay taking Hiura if you were to slip a bit more from his current ADP. I am not seeking him out at his ADP, and I'm not taking him at his ADP. But if he slips, I could buy in then, because I think there is a path to a really good year. We can get back to that pedigree he had coming out of college, the pedigree he had in the lower minors. If we get that, he'll be worth his ADP. I just think the probability of that is a bit too low to take him where he's currently going, but a little bit later, I could be talked into it for sure.
I will say about the mental burden that's maybe lessened by playing first base. 2 people just rolled their eyes at that, and it was Ron Washington from the movie Moneyball and me having watched a full season of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Play first base in 2020. Full season, obviously.
Right.
I think you're right. I think that is going to be such a good defensive team. I'm almost strangely excited, especially after they signed JBJ. How good at defense that team is. I don't know if that's something you can necessarily
They're plus
watch.
380 to win the NL Central. I'm just saying, if I'm going to talk trash on the Cardinals, I might as well talk with the Brewers. I'm pretty into that one. Plus 380 to win the NL Central. Low scoring games, like, they're not going to hit, but like, they're going to have a lot of low scoring games. I can get behind that for sure.
It's crazy. I mean, like, we might have Lorenzo Cain playing like right field, and I know he's like 35 and
right.
can go a number of different ways, but 22 defensive runs saved in 2019. This is going to be a great defensive team. Like, Brandon Woodruff is going to be so happy when anyone actually makes contact, which is not going to be often.
They do need that too, because the rest of the rotation after Burns is super ball in play dependent. I don't know if that's a word, but like ball in play dependent. They're low strikeout pitchers. That's probably the better way to phrase it. They need good defense, but they've got it now.
Well, speaking of great defense and strikeouts, that is a more perfect segue than I could have ever made. Let's talk about Javier Baez. Really just Mr. Perfect defense and strikeouts himself. Baez last season, 235 plate appearances, 203, 238, 360 slash line, 0.09 walk to strikeout ratio, 57 WRC plus, third lowest qualified mark in all of baseball last season. That OBP of 238, I might not even have to say this. I think everyone's figured it out. The lowest on base percentage in all of baseball. And granted, we tend to all play in batting average leagues. I think the OPS, OBP leagues, they've caught on, but still standard is batting average. So you might point to that and say, well, what does it matter? I'm not paying for his on-base percentage. I'm not a real life team. I just need his fantasy numbers. It's still the mark of a very flawed hitter. And, at the end of the day, while there's always going to be your Mondeses and your VRs to some extent, buying flawed hitters just feels bad, especially with an ADP of 71.7. And I think the thing that really worries me about Baez, because with a lot of these guys, we can talk about, maybe the lineup's not great, the park's not great, whatever. For as much as Chicago seemed like they spent the entire offseason trying to not win, their offense is still going to be really good. This is a team that could score a lot of runs still. So Baez could be in the middle of a very, very good lineup, and counting stats could come from that. But he's someone who was also like getting a little MVP buzz the first half of 2019, and the second half of 2019 was awful. So now we've got not just the weird augmented 2020 season, but he was also bad the second half of 2019. So is there any part of you that's saying, and looking at the tools of Baez and being enticed by that, or is this another guy where we're just going to steer clear?
I think I'm pretty intrigued by him because last year was really weird. The bad play discipline numbers, like you said, have always been there. That's going to be there. Those aren't going to go away. But I think it was just, it didn't seem like he was seeing the ball all that well. His contact rate when he did swing was by far the lowest it has been. It was down quite a bit. And he actually cut down his chase rate. He chased fewer pitches outside the zone than he had in the past. So I don't really know what was going on. I think that could be a situation where potentially he may have been, thrown off his usual schedule by the weird spring training stuff. When he swung the bat, when he made contact, there was still something kind of good there. And there's a possibility he can steal bases. Like you said, this lineup isn't that bad. And we are getting at least a discount on Baez, going in the 70s. That's, I think, enough for him to be pretty intriguing for me. And I think that the good thing about Baez is even that if the batting average is not that good, even if he continues to strike out at an increased rate, there will still be other stuff there. He will still hit home runs because he's making hard contact. He will still get some runs scored, get some RBIs on that team. Maybe he'll steal a couple of bases as well. I think that floor is really enticing. And if he does get back to being the hitter he was first half of 2019, which is, I think, very much in the range of outcomes, that's upside. So to me, if we're charting out the range of outcomes for Javier Baez relative to a lot of guys in that range, I don't think it's that bad, honestly. So again, it's probably not a guy I'm going out of my way to reach for, but if I'm on the board and he's about in his ADP, I'm very open to taking him just because I think that there is enough there for me to still feel good about him having a very good floor with a path to a good ceiling once again, too.
I might be wrong about this, but I believe he was one of the sort of lump of players who there was a lot of news stories and a lot of talk last season about really struggled because he was someone who relied a lot on the in-between bats video usage. I'm 90% sure he was one of those guys. I'm 100% sure JD Martinez is one of those guys. He was the main dude complaining about that last season. This is someone who I'm really interested to get your opinion on because I mentioned rotation earlier, but I think if we had an aesthetic on that show, it was we both are still in love with the 2016-2017 Arizona Diamondbacks.
Yes.
Whether it be their pitchers or their positional players. JD Martinez, the last couple seasons, it was like a rich man's Nelson Cruz. He was always going to go in the second round and you knew exactly what you were getting from him. You were going to have to draft a little bit different because you'd have to find steals somewhere else. And he's never going to give you that, obviously, but he was so safe. Maybe the safest player in all of baseball. He could just hit. And then last season that stopped happening. And again, whether or not we want to say the video thing was tangible evidence of why that stopped happening. And to the best of my knowledge, he's not going to be allowed to go back to the 2019 video watching habits, even in 2021. So if that is something you put stock into, it's not getting better. But 237 plate appearances, 213, 291, 389, 77 WRC plus. You go from 2014 to 2019. He's got a 398 WOBA, which is second among qualified players to obviously Mike Trout, who is crushing him. But he was the best non-Mike Trout hitter in baseball for a half decade. And then it's gone. Are we saying it's age? Are we concerned about the video thing? Is there enough circumstantial weird stuff going around this where when you start adding it all together, you're out? Or do you just look at JD Martinez in the 6th round and say, or even the 7th round and say, I'm getting JD Martinez in the 6th or 7th round. I just have to do this.
Yeah, I think that there is enough there where I'm pretty nervous about it. And I think that you were talking about Nelson Cruz before. I could just take Nelson Cruz at a pretty similar ADP and get actual Nelson Cruz as opposed to the, I guess now fake Nelson Cruz. I don't know. I don't want to besmirch JD Martinez too much because like you said, that Diamondbacks team still fond in my heart. Yasmani Tomas was in spring training last year and it caught my attention, but nothing happened with it. But regardless, I think that with Martinez, there is enough concern there where I am okay not actively seeking him out and probably just taking a pass because I don't recall who wrote this, but there was a study done either for ESPN or Fangraphs a couple years ago that looked at the aging curves of different kinds of players. And the kind of player that JD Martinez is the one where when the fall off happened, it happened. I think that Joey Votto might have been on that list as well. We've seen slight signs of life again for Votto, but
a Jose Bautista, Edwin Encarnacion,
exactly,
sort of
100% like that. Although Edwin Encarnacion still someone I use far too often in DFS, but with Martinez, he fits in that bucket. And we had the video thing. I think that they're getting partial video back, but not the same that they had in 2019. Right. They're getting a portion of it back, so maybe he gets better. But what does better look like? Better to me looks like a guy who's probably going to be okay in the strikeout rate department. He'll get you an okay batting average, and he's in a good park too. But the offense, not what it was back then. There's no Mookie. There's no Andrew Benintendi. I mean, Benintendi last year wasn't, doing too much anyway, but those are losses to that offense. So I think that you make it a worse context for JD Martinez. Not the type of guy who's going to give you stolen bases. So I think that the floor on him is a little bit lower than other guys we discussed too. That's enough where I'm kind of I could see him potentially bouncing back, but I feel like we can talk about FOMO. I don't have a lot of FOMO with JD Martinez, whereas I do with a guy like Javier Baez. So to me, I think that lack of FOMO and the lack of, having a tremendous ceiling where I truly regret not targeting him, I don't think it's really there. So I don't think it's an outrageous idea. If you want to buy back in based on the assumption that, he gets better in 2020, I don't think that's bad process. I just don't see enough. I see enough red flags for me to be very wary of doing so myself.
No, I think I agree. And I think when you are sitting there and you look at, you strip away the name and just say, what is he as a profile? And if we're saying 280 batting average, 25 to 30 home runs, 85 to 90 runs, RBI, and 0 stolen bases, it just seems like there's a lot of guys you can get who have even if it's maybe JD's 70th percentile outcome and it's another couple guys 80th or 85th percentile, they're going for so much cheaper that you can probably just find that profile in a lot of different places. Sad to say though, I am a very big JD Martinez fan. He has won me many fantasy baseball championships. So I do wish him well, even though he is a Red Sox. And I do not like the Red Sox. But a team that no one seems to like outside of Houston Astros. Let's talk about Jose Altuve. I know it's funny. We came into the show saying, let's focus on 2020 and all the weird things that happened in 2020. And so many of these guys have just other things going on aside from that they struggled in 2020. But Altuve fits the bill. He struggled in 2020. 210 plate appearances. And for a guy who was essentially hitting 320 for the better part of 7 seasons, 219, 286, 394. He is still going inside the top 100 in NFBC formats, 98.7 to be exact on that ADP, but 77 WRC plus last season. And this is someone who already in 2019 had so many questions. And I feel like we were already talking about Altuve just on and on and on leading into the 2020 season, because it was, okay, now Jose Altuve is a 30 home run, no stolen base guy. When did that happen? And, you know, the news of the Astros cheating scandal kind of broke out, and it was like, well, who's going to be affected by this? And it seems like Altuve was, and I don't know how much stock we want to put into this. It's, again, not something that's necessarily tangible, but it's there and we all know about it. But we're talking about someone who's known as a stolen base batting average guy, coming off a year where he had 2 stolen bases and was 27th percentile expected batting average. Where would he have to be going for you to have interest, Jim? And just in a general sense, what is Jose Altuve if he's not batting 300 and stealing bases?
Nothing. Like, there's nothing there, because he's not going to hit for power again. I think we can say that pretty definitively with the changes potentially to the baseball for this year. Like, he's not going to pop 30. I think we can say that with a pretty good amount of certainty. And I think you look at his sprint speed, it was still fine last year, but it seems like there's a lack of willingness to run, even when the power was not there. I think back in 2019, like, he didn't run as much that year either as he had in the past. So I think that, like, best case scenario for Jose Altuve, he's going to be better than last year. I think he'll definitely be better than last year. So, like, bounce back, sure. Will he bounce back enough to be worth a top 100 pick? It's a pretty tough sell for me, because best case scenario is he's a 300 hitter who is okay, probably pretty good in runs scored, decent in RBIs, but is actively a negative in power and doesn't provide enough steals to counteract that. If that's your best case scenario, like you're talking about, you know, percentile outcome, like if that's your 85th percentile outcome, that's tough. Like, he's going ahead of Carlos Correa. I can talk myself into Carlos Correa 15,000 times faster than I can talk myself into Jose Altuve, and I can get Correa later. So I think that the odds that he bounces back and is a contributor in those important categories are pretty low. And B, if he does bounce back, what does he bounce back to? I can't get there. So, like, again, we were talking before the show, like, I want to buy into guys who had tough years last year, but there are so many guys who there are reasons not to do so, right, that, like, I find myself passing on a lot of them. And I think that Altuve is, you know, I think Arenado is the poster child of that for me, but I think that Altuve is a pretty close second where it could happen, but I don't really feel the inclination to be the guy who gets there if it does.
Well, I think the last guy we're going to talk about is the one that I will say off the bat I am the most optimistic about. And for whatever reason, seems like he's been the most affected by his 2020 stat line. And probably the only person we could legitimately call a sleeper considering his ADP. He's the only guy in this position group outside the top 100. He's going around pick 128 right now in NFBC formats. And that is Kris Bryant. And there's a lot to unpack here when it comes to Kris Bryant. At least I think there is. 147 plate appearances. So right off the bat, you'll note that's a lot less than anyone else we've talked about so far, because he didn't even really have a 60-game season. He had a 30-game season, if you even want to call it that. Wrist injuries, elbow injuries, oblique issues. I think that took a week in late August. Like, just nagging injuries across the board. And I think Bryant is someone who presents every single excuse you could possibly have. Like, if we went back across the last 10 years and talked about conversations you have in March and reasons to like a guy who maybe the stats say you shouldn't like, it's, oh, it was a small sample. Oh, he was injured. Oh, he's done it before. Like, he's Kris Bryant. Come on, he'll get it done. And I don't want to be simplistic, but he's Kris Bryant. Like, I kind of just want to know what we're all doing here. I mean, the numbers, terrible. I think we all understand that, but his career numbers coming into last season, 284, 385, 516 with a 139 WRC plus. And I understand the StatCast numbers were horrendous last season. He had more blue on there than the coastal United States. Like, it's bad. And he's never been someone who StatCast really loves anyway, even when he's going well. But is this a situation where maybe we're almost holding Kris Bryant's reputation against him? Because we're now in year, I guess, 7 or 8 of the Kris Bryant era. And I mean, you'll remember as well as I do, Jim, when this guy was a prospect, yeah. I mean, he was supposed to change baseball. And while he's been very good, again, a 139 WRC plus is fantastic. It's elite. he hasn't been Mike Trout. He hasn't been, Stan Musial. Like he just hasn't been that guy. And was this an opportunity for some people who maybe just haven't liked Kris Bryant's career arc to just be like, I can quit him now? Later, Kris Bryant, like I'm just done with you, because that's kind of what it seems like.
But this isn't even the first time this has happened where there's been a weird negative sentiment around Kris Bryant. Going back into 2019, like the 2018 season, there was a lot of skepticism around Kris Bryant. And they're like, okay, we're going to push this guy's ADP down. I was like, oh, why are we doing this to Kris Bryant? And like entering 2019, I was super excited to draft Kris Bryant. And like, you look back to 2018, the year that initially I think started the negative sentiment, he's still at a 126 WRC plus. He wasn't like elite for fantasy because just 13 home runs and 457 plate appearances, but like he was a good baseball player. 2019, very good. Excellent year once again, a 135 WRC plus, had the batting average. So as recently as 2019, this guy was a tremendous baseball player. Last year had the injuries, and they're not just injuries. They are like, if you make a checklist of every injury that could lead to a downtick in hitters' production that expands beyond after they're back, it's oblique, it's wrist, not as much elbow, but like oblique and wrist are high up on that list of injuries you note as being things that will drag a guy down beyond even when they come back. So I think he is kind of the prototypical bounce back guy, because again, it's not that long ago that he was very good. There are paths to him being better. You look back at last year in his plate discipline numbers, like his contact rate on pitches outside the zone cratered. And that to me kind of feels like, if we're going to make like an analog here, if you look at a quarterback's numbers while under pressure, it's a small sample, high variance, very volatile. We could see that number bounce back easily this year. And if it does, that strikeout rate will probably come back down, which means his batting average goes up. I think that the power should come back too, with the injuries not being an issue anymore. So I think that Kris Bryant, of the guys we have discussed, the easiest sell for me, and I have not said I will actively target this player yet. I will actively target Kris Bryant happily this year. And I think like from a dynasty perspective, he's not going to be like, you're not going to get him for free, but I'd be willing to pay for Kris Bryant in dynasty, because I think that the odds of this is his low value for the next 5 years it's decently high.
No, I think it's a really nice way to kind of dovetail this show, starting with Nolan Arenado and then finishing with Kris Bryant as a perfect example of why you don't take someone like Nolan Arenado at his current ADP, because you can get Kris Bryant 100 picks later. I mean, again, we know 2021 is going to be a crazy season. Some of these ADPs are probably going to look back in 5 years and go, what were we doing? How were we reacting to samples that small? But that is the magic of having to go over fantasy baseball every single day, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today. You can follow Jim at Jim Saunis, senior writer and analyst for Number Fire. Jim, let people know what you're going up. What's going on right now?
Yeah, we'll be doing daily MLB stuff over on our Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed as well. So I'm looking forward to having that. We'll be doing YouTube chats, YouTube Q&As every weekday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. So it's fun to get to talk to people about baseball again. Baseball, I've missed it quite a bit, partly because I've been in a DFS rut, like that started like NFL playoffs, and I've needed to snap out of it. Like I've had some basketball things that have helped, but like I need to snap out of this rut, and I think baseball will help a lot. So I'm looking forward to getting things back going at the end of this month.
I agree. And I think a lot of people out there can agree as well. And again, if you're someone who's looking to play DFS and get better at it, hopefully, Jim is out there with his podcast. And again, Mayo Media Network, we're going to be doing a daily pod. They're going to be shorter, about 15 to 20 minutes, so easily digestible. It's going to be me, a couple other writers every day of the week. So make sure to subscribe again to the audio feed, leave that 5-star review and a Twitter handle or an email address. You get put into that $100 draw. Go to prizepicks.com. Sign up there using the MMNMLB code for a $100 match bonus, and leave a comment and a like on this video and tell us who you think of those 6 guys, or maybe somebody else, someone you've got your eye on as a bounce back player in 2021. I'm Garion Thorne. This has been Fantasy Baseball Picks and Bets presented by Prize Picks. We'll catch you next time.